So the last field we're going to get into the details with is that of the modular content field. Now, modular content is available in two flavors. You've got the single block and the multiple blocks. And I think that the best way to understand this is kind of the different use cases it unlocks. So a single block allows editors to only reference one block within that modular content field. So this would be great for cases where you have reusable models, but you don't necessarily want to use the links feature. What I mean is, let's say you've got an e-commerce business and you've got 100 store locations and you've got 100 store managers. Now, both of these models are quite likely to have something like an address. But if you were to use a link, you'd essentially have 200 addresses to choose from every time you wanted to sort of reference them to one another. So what we can do here is leverage the single block where we have a block for an address. So every time you're creating a new store location or adding a new store manager into your CMS, you can have this address as a field. We also have something called a frameless presentation that I'll explain in a bit, which lets you see these fields as a sort of more native inclusion to the address, to the store location or the store manager model. The other option is that of multiple blocks. Now, this is a fantastic way to give editors a sort of drag and drop functionality when building out landing pages. Let's say we're building an about page or a case study page where you've got tons of blocks for things like quotes, for heroes, for statistics, for content, for testimonials, and whatever else you would have in those pages. You could drag and drop the layout to kind of customize what that page would look like within certain boundaries of what blocks you're allowed to play with. If we quickly take a look at what the sort of options available to us here are, you've got the validations for selecting which blocks would be allowed. Now, since you have something like a content or a newsletter sign up or an industry, you can select multiple options for editors to play around with. However, on the content editing experience itself, they could only end up using one. So even though they have the possibility to choose from a content block or a newsletter sign up, if I were to go ahead and choose newsletter sign up, that's it. I wouldn't be able to also add content or an industry block. On the presentation side, you can choose whether this is a framed or a frameless block. Now, a framed block is where the editor would know that they are choosing from different blocks, whereas the frameless block would show up as a very seamless sort of native experience within that model. You would think of those fields as part of the model itself without necessarily knowing that a different block is being referenced. However, this option is not available if you've given multiple options to an editor. For this sort of seamless experience to show on the editor within the validations, this has to be a required field, and you can only select one, which means whenever someone's creating content, the newsletter sign up fields would always be visible as if they're part of the model itself. So let's go ahead and save this, and we will create an example together just to show how this works. However, on the sort of multiple block side, this is where you would have the option to create this sort of page builder experience. So let's go ahead and imagine a case study page. We're probably going to need an industry, we're going to need some content, a quote, statistic, a testimonial video, and so on. And this would allow us to sort of play around with all these possible blocks when creating a new case study page. On the presentation side, for multiple blocks, you cannot have a frameless experience because, again, you as an editor have the flexibility and the option to choose from many of these. You could, however, show these as collapsed by default just to have a cleaner experience. So let's look at having the option of something very similar together. Let's go and create a simple block and call it an address. Now here you're definitely going to have something like the name, or let's call it a title for something like an office location maybe. Let's use the location tag for an address, and why not? Let's just say public transport to see whether or not public transport would be available. When creating a model now, we could have something like a office location, where again we would go ahead and add some fields like the name of the HQ, whether it's I don't know, is it a satellite office, yes or no? And rather than creating fields again for the street address, the location, the public transport availability, and so on, we would simply have a modular content field where we have a single block. We can call this the address because that is the block we would be referencing. And for an editor to feel like those fields are part of the model itself and not have to sort of know we have a block attached, we can go ahead and choose the frameless option once we set it to required. And we can go ahead and save this. On the other hand, if we wanted to build a landing page for a case study, so let's call it a new case study, we would have the option to sort of create a template here. So let's just give a very simple title for the case study, so we have a way of referencing this in the future. But the entire page itself doesn't need to have individual fields or blocks for things like the content or the quote. We have all of this wrapped up in the blocks we've created earlier. So all we need to do is select something that gives us the multiple options. So we'll just call it case study content for now. And this is where the editors would choose things like the actual content, where they write the case study, the industry that the customer is from, giving a quote by the person they've interviewed, perhaps a video testimonial from the person they've interviewed as well, and some statistics to showcase what the case study would be. What we've essentially done here is give editors or ourselves these blocks to play around with. So when we create a case study and we have some great content and a video testimonial, but we don't really have statistics, we're able to choose exactly which blocks we want this case study to be composed of. And we'll go ahead and save this. And essentially, we just have one field for a case study, which if we were to look at, well, we're going to do this a lot more in detail later. But if we wanted to go into the content editing view really quickly, we can see that we can now add all of these components or these blocks to create the case study exactly the way we want it. Oops, and since I kind of already gave you a sneak peek into the content view for modular content, let's also see what the difference is when we look at the sort of frameless view for a single block. So if you remember how we set up the office location with the address being a single block with a frameless display, the difference here is rather than sort of selecting multiple blocks to build a template out of, you can see that the address is a very natively placed section within the office location model itself. So it looks like it's always been a part of this model rather than a sort of external block.